Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take stacks of complex sources and extract the essential knowledge you need to be thoroughly informed. Thanks for listening to this episode. Like and subscribe to our channel.
Today, we are diving into a really volatile situation in Brazil. We're talking about the recent arrest of former President Jair Bolsonaro on November 22nd, 2025.
It's a huge event, and the sources you've shared, they don't just see it as a legal move. They frame it with this incredibly powerful metaphor.
Right. Terceira facada em Jair Bolsonaro, the third stabbing.
Exactly. And that metaphor it's the whole framework. The argument from these analysts is that this isn't random. It's the final act in a long pattern to neutralize him as a political force.
So that's our mission today. We need to unpack what these three stabbings actually are, according to the source materials timeline.
Right.
I'll go from a physical attack to political censorship and then to this institutional culmination.
And we'll dig into the very specific and highly criticized legal arguments that were used to justify this arrest. And as always, we're staying completely impartial. We're just laying out the facts and the legal critiques from the sources so you can make sense of it all.
Precisely. To really get it, you have to start where it all began, with the first literal stabbing.
The first stabbing. The attempt at physical elimination. I mean, most Brazilians will never forget this. It was back in 2018, right before the election.
Yeah. Bolsonaro was a candidate. He was at a campaign rally in Juiz de Fora, and a man named Adelio Bispo de Oliveira just stabbed him.
It was caught on camera, just a shocking moment. He survived, but the sources make it clear he's had permanent physical issues ever since.
But the controversy, it almost immediately shifted from the attack itself to the investigation.
And what was the official conclusion, the one that created so much distrust?
The official line was that Adelio acted completely alone. He was declared inimputable, which basically means he couldn't be held criminally responsible because of a persistent delusional disorder.
But the sources we have say the federal police, the PAF, they never really answered the biggest questions.
Right, especially the question of his legal defense.
That's the part that always stood out. How does this guy immediately get a top-tier law firm to send lawyers on a private jet just hours after the attack? Who was paying for that?
Exactly. That question was never answered. And then there's what the sources call an incommoda coincidencia, an uncomfortable coincidence.
Which was?
The lead police delegate on a key part of that investigation was later promoted by the Lula government and sent to a strategic post overseas. For Bolsonaro's supporters, that just deepened all the suspicion.
So that's the root of it, this deep, fundamental distrust between Bolsonaro's camp and the PF, which then just exploded in 2020.
It did. It led straight to that clash when Bolsonaro tried to appoint his own guy, Alexandre Ramagem, to be the head of the PF.
And Justice Alexandre de Moraes stepped in and blocked it.
He did. He argued Bolsonaro was trying to interfere with police investigations. But the sources frame that intervention itself as a massive escalation, setting the stage for everything that followed.
Which brings us to the second stabbing, the political neutralization.
Right. If the first attack was physical, the second was all about controlling information and censorship. And this was mainly done through Brazil's electoral judiciary in the run-up to the 2022 election.
How did that system even get built? The sources describe a whole ecosystem of control.
Well, it wasn't an overnight thing. The Superior Electoral Court, the TSE, started building this permanent apparatus to combat disinformation way back around 2017.
And they started importing these international concepts. The sources use a really heavy term for it, the Complexo Industrial da Censura.
The censorship industrial complex.
What does that actually mean in practice?
It means, allegedly, the creation of this unsupervised surveillance nucleus, reportedly under Minister Moraes, that basically acted like an informal political monitoring group. They used specific theories, like the fire hosing theory.
Fire hosing. For anyone who hasn't heard that term, what are we talking about?
It's the idea that if a narrative gets too popular online, you don't treat it as free speech. You treat it as a coordinated psychological operation meant to destabilize things. And the sources allege this theory was used to justify filtering content and censoring voices, mostly on the right, in 2022.
And we have specific examples of this from things like the Twitter files, Brazil revelations.
Exactly. They show how the judiciary was allegedly pressuring social media companies to take down content, often without any public court order. But the key issue the sources raise is the asymmetry of it all.
The perfect example being the documentary Quem Mandu Matar Jair Bolsonaro.
Right, a factual investigation into the unanswered questions from the 2018 attack.
And the TSE banned it.
They banned it. They even suspended the channel's monetization. And the reason they gave was that even the truth could be prohibited if it had the potential to confundir el elector, to confuse the voter.
Unbelievable. Now, contrast that with the Faquia video.
Yeah, a piece of counter-propaganda that just baselessly claimed the stabbing was staged.
And what happened to that?
It spread everywhere. YouTube took it down eventually, but the sources say it stayed up on Facebook. It was even republished by figures linked to the Workers' Party. And that contrast is, for these sources, the essence of the second stabbing.
Which leads us, finally, to the third stabbing, the institutional one, the arrest itself on November 22nd, 2025.
After 100 days of house arrest, Justice Moraes ordered him to be taken into preventive detention. And the sources are clear. They see this as the justice system being used as a political weapon.
Even the date, the 22nd, was Bolsonaro's old ballot number. The symbolism seems intentional.
It does. But the real question is why? Why rely on legal arguments that critics, immediately called flimsy and speculative?
Okay, let's break them down. The sources identify three fragile pillars used to justify the arrest. The first one was the vigil risk.
This one is maybe the shakiest. His son, Flavio, called for a religious vigil. It never even happened. But the court transformed this idea of a vigil into an imminent criminal movement capable of repeating the January 8th riots.
So just the possibility of his supporters gathering was treated as a criminal plan.
It was pure inference, or at least sound, as the sources call it. There was no proof of illicit planning. The second pillar was the ankle monitor violation.
Right, he admitted using a soldering iron on it out of curiosity.
But legally, that doesn't automatically mean you get thrown in jail.
Mm-hmm.
An attorney in the sources, Andre Marsilia, argues that proper procedure was bypassed. You're supposed to notify the defense, prove there's a real flight risk.
And the timing of it was bizarre, wasn't it?
Completely. The alert went off at 12:08 in the morning inside his house while he was surrounded by police surveillance. How is that a logical escape attempt?
The sources also compare this to another case.
They do. Former President Fernando Collor disabled his monitor for over a day in a much more serious situation, and he was not put in preventive detention. It suggests a selective kind of severity.
Okay, and the third justification. The sources call it the most absurd.
The flight of third parties. They use the fact that some of his allies, like Carla Zambelli and Ramagem, had left Brazil to infer that Bolsonaro was also planning to flee.
Wait, so because other people left the country, they assumed he would too?
Exactly. A lawyer named Inigo Viterbo is quoted saying this violates basic legal principles. You can't blame a defendant for what other people do unless you can prove he knew about it or was part of the plan.
And the ultimate counter-argument to all of this is what Bolsonaro himself did, isn't it? He stayed.
Absolutely. The sources stress this. He had chances to seek political asylum in the U.S. or at an embassy. He chose to turn himself in. That decision completely dismantles the plot, as they say, of him being a fugitive.
So the arrest happens and the political reaction is immediate and intense.
Oh, yeah. On the right, his son called it the biggest political persecution ever. On the left, it was celebrated as overdue justice.
And internationally, you had former U.S. President Trump calling it a witch hunt and even briefly putting tariffs on Brazilian goods.
Right, those are being rolled back now. But what's interesting is that while all this was happening, the Lula government was actually getting things done.
What kind of things?
They passed a big cost containment package, saving about 25 billion reais. And they pushed through a major income tax reform.
The one raising the tax-free limit.
Right. Up to 5,000 reais, which helps the middle class.
Mm-hmm.
And they paid for it with a new minimum tax on high incomes and foreign dividends. It shows a real focus on policy despite the political chaos.
Now, we have to talk about the counter-narrative here because the sources we have are not just painting Bolsonaro as a simple victim.
No, and this is a crucial point for an impartial analysis. A commentator named Guilherme Spader argues that Bolsonaro, in a way, helped create the monster that's now coming after him.
What does he mean by that?
He argues that Bolsonaro was fine with the Supreme Court's aggressive investigations, the Encaretadas fake news, when it was targeting his opponents.
Like when it censored the magazine Revista Crusoe back in 2019.
Exactly. The argument is that he let this judicial power grow unchecked because it benefited him at the time. The quote from Spader is powerful. He says, Bolsonaro refestelou na alcova da ilegalidade. He feasted in the alcove of illegality.
So he only became a victim of judicial overreach when that same overreach was finally turned against him.
That's the argument. It complicates the whole narrative significantly.
Shifting gears a bit, what was the economic reaction? Did the markets panic?
Surprisingly, not at all. They were totally unfazed. It seems like investors had already priced this in and are more focused on the fundamentals.
And the fundamentals are looking okay.
They're stabilizing. Inflation is projected to ease to 4.6% in 2025, and the central bank is keeping the main interest rate, the SELIC, steady at a really high 15%.
Which for our listeners, a 15% rate is a strong signal of stability to foreign investors, right?
It is. It's a sign of very cautious, tight monetary policy, which investors like. It suggests that political noise is separate from the economic track.
And finally, there's this fascinating contradiction on the environmental front, what you called the Amazonian climate paradox.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of Brazil's balancing act. On one hand, they're hosting the COP30 Climate Summit, securing €1 billion for the Tropical Forest Fund, a huge diplomatic success.
But on the other hand,
Domestically, they just approved a controversial license for the state oil company, Petrobras, to drill for oil near the mouth of the Amazon River.
wow, critics must have called that out.
They called it sabotaging the COP. It just perfectly highlights this internal struggle between Brazil's global environmental promises and its domestic need for economic development.
So the big takeaway here is that Bolsonaro's future probably depends less on these fragile legal arguments and more on who wins the battle over the narrative.
Exactly. Is this the judiciary saving democracy? Or is it an out-of-control system taking down a man who has become a symbol of popular resistance for millions?
The arrest isn't the end, then. It's really just the start of a new chapter in this fight, one that's going to play out in international courts and on the streets. The final thought for you to consider is this. Can Brazil actually hold its leaders accountable and find stability while these massive institutional divides just seem to be getting deeper? Thanks for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed, like and subscribe to our channel. See you next time.